I'm Olivia Chambers, 42 years old, and if there's one thing I've always believed I understood, it was work. For 15 years, I poured nearly every piece of my life into rebuilding Barton and Hale manufacturing, dragging it from a chaotic, inefficient distribution mess into a logistics network strong enough to withstand some of the biggest shocks in the American market. I once slept in the office 4 nights straight during the pandemic to coordinate emergency relief shipments. I missed my daughter's middle school graduation because we were drowning in an unprecedented inventory crisis. And I lost my marriage because the one thing I thought I couldn't abandon was this job. Thinking back, I'm still not sure if that was dedication or blindness. But back then, I truly believed I was doing the right thing, that my effort would be recognized, that my loyalty would be repaid. And then everything collapsed, all within one Monday morning meeting. That day, I was presenting our quarterly results. The projector glowed, the AC blasted cold air down my back, and I could feel the room's focus tightening as I flipped to the inventory slide. I knew every number by heart: delivery delays, shipment frequency, shrinkage rates, average cost per freight mile. Everything had finally stabilized after months of fighting labor shortages and fuel hikes. I was mid-sentence when the conference room door opened. He walked in like the entire room had been built just to spotlight him. Travis Hale, 34, newly appointed Director of Strategic Restructuring, the only son of the company's chairman. His gray dress shirt was so crisp I could have used it as a mirror. He didn't acknowledge anyone, just gave this casual nod, the kind you only see from people who've never done a day of real work in their lives. He leaned back against the wall, crossed his arms, and delivered the sentence that would rewrite the rest of my life. I don't understand why this company still keeps dead weight like you. The room stopped breathing. No one moved. A few eyes flicked toward me, pitying, but silent. I heard a pen drop next to Evan Reed, our senior operations manager, one of the few who had always treated me fairly. But even he didn't speak. Everyone knew that standing up to Travis was the fastest way to end your career. I stayed still. I fought to keep my face from breaking. I tried to continue my presentation, but my voice had lost its steadiness. All I could hear in my head was the pounding of my own heartbeat. When the meeting ended, I walked out quickly. I didn't want anyone to see me crack. But HR was already waiting outside, as if they had a schedule for my humiliation. They said they needed an urgent meeting. Polite, cold. The exact tone I'd seen them use every time someone was about to be terminated. I knew what was coming. But knowing is one thing. Living through it is another. In the HR office, they slid a thick packet in front of me. Severance documents. Terms already filled in. Prepared long before I walked into that conference room. All they needed was my signature. I didn't hear half of what they said. All I felt was a numb, widening emptiness. I had built the foundation they stood on, spent half my life reinforcing it, and one insult from Travis was enough for them to toss me aside like outdated equipment. On my way out of the building, I saw Evan standing in the hallway, guilt written all over his face, yet still silent. I understood. In this world, sometimes silence is the only way to survive. The Minnesota fall air was so cold that when I opened my car door, my hands trembled. I sat there for a long time. No engine running, no tears, just quiet. Some kinds of pain are too heavy for tears. That night, when the house was nothing but the ticking clock and my tired breathing, I opened the safe in my home office. Inside was a folder I'd been keeping for 6 months. Its title sat at the top of the first page: North Axis Logistics, Feasibility Acquisition Proposal. I stared at it for a long time, and I knew, without question, that the day Travis called me dead weight was the day he shot himself in the foot. I whispered a single sentence meant only for myself: if they want to play, I'll play by my rules. As I sat in that familiar room, the warm desk lamp washing over the North Axis folder, it felt like a new line had been drawn in my life. All the old doors had slammed shut, but right there under my hand was the key to another one. Bigger, riskier, and maybe the only one strong enough to pull me out of the pit they tried to bury me in. Before I turn the page on this next chapter, there's one thing I want to know. Not out of curiosity, but because I want to feel who's walking this road with me. If you're still listening, tell me where you are on this wide American map, or anywhere else you're tuning in from. Drop a comment. I want to know which city, which corner of your room, which moment of your day you're sharing with me. And if you, like me, have ever been underestimated, pushed aside, dismissed simply because someone thought they had the right to treat you that way, don't walk away from this story. What's coming next isn't just revenge, it's me taking back my voice. If you like stories where the underdog rises with intelligence, strategy, and a persistence sharper than any cruelty thrown at them, stay with me. There's much more ahead. I still remember the feeling when I closed the safe. The sound of metal locking into place echoed like the period at the end of 15 years of devotion. But at the same time, it opened a new chapter I had been preparing for longer than I dared to admit, even if back then I wasn't sure I had the courage to start it. I reread the first page of the North Axis file, and a familiar sensation washed over me. This wasn't an idea born out of anger or humiliation. I had started thinking about it 6 months earlier. And if I'm being honest, the idea first surfaced right after the board whispered that the company needed a generational shift in leadership. I knew exactly what kind of shift they meant. People like me are always the first to be sacrificed. North Axis was the most critical link in Barton and Hale's logistics chain. 68% of the corporation's freight moved through its system. If North Axis stumbled, Barton and Hale would freeze like a machine pushed past its limits. And I was the only person in the company who had worked closely with them long enough to understand every strength and weakness in their operation. Their headquarters sat in Kansas City, a strategic hub in American logistics thanks to its central position and easy access to both coasts. They had a massive trucking fleet, expansive warehouses, and a lineup of long-term contracts. But that was just the surface. Beneath that shell was a far more troubling reality. North Axis was drowning in a financial crisis. Fuel costs spiked. Their old high-interest loans kept draining their cash. 2 straight years of declining revenue had pushed their liquidity off a cliff. Tensions between departments flared constantly. Transportation blamed finance for underfunding maintenance. Finance accused transportation of reckless spending. They argued in meetings more than they solved problems. And among everyone trying to survive the chaos, only one man saw that North Axis needed an escape hatch. Their CEO, Dennis Kerr, is 61 years old, practical, sharp, but exhausted from carrying a company sinking under its own weight. I had met him twice when I was still with Barton and Hale, and in our most recent conversation, his eyes revealed a truth only the attentive could see. He wanted out. I understood that look. We were both people who had spent our lives running after jobs that consumed nearly everything we had. When Dennis mentioned selling part of his shares to lighten the load, I knew he wasn't joking. I brought the North Axis acquisition proposal to Barton and Hale last February. I remember the board's refusal clearly. They said the timing wasn't right. They said the company had other priorities. But I knew the real reason. They didn't want someone like me at the center of a major deal. I wasn't the type they wanted to elevate. I was a workhorse, not a face for the spotlight. To them, I was reliable, but not someone who should sit at the decision-making table. When they rejected my proposal, I started asking myself whether I could do this alone. I didn't know the answer, but I knew I needed to prepare for the day I might be forced to walk away. And that day came much sooner than I expected. I spent the entire night reviewing every page of the file. The next morning, I called Dennis. He picked up after one ring, as if he had been waiting for that call. We met at a small cafe near Union Station in Kansas City. The air was cold that morning, and every time someone opened the door, a draft crept down my collar. Dennis looked older than when I last saw him, but his eyes were still sharp. He sat across from me and spoke immediately, without any theatrics. If you want in, this is the moment. I knew he wasn't lying, and I knew I couldn't step back anymore. We discussed everything in detail. I laid out my financial capacity. And while I wasn't the ideal buyer, I had something Dennis valued more than money. I understood the system, and I knew how to save it. North Axis didn't need a passive investor. They needed someone who knew how to run a business, rebuild processes, and most importantly, stabilize the people inside. I used my entire severance. I cashed out the old investment I'd held for 9 years. I pulled most of my savings, the money meant for my daughter's college tuition. And then I took out a large, unsecured loan, enough to convince Dennis I was serious. When everything was added up, I had enough to buy 54% of North Axis shares. The signing took place in a small conference room inside their headquarters. No applause, no champagne, just the contract on the table and Dennis's tired nod. He said he trusted me. I thanked him, though I wasn't sure I trusted myself. When he left, I walked into my new office. The room was modest, the ceiling a bit low, the wooden desk worn down, the fluorescent light slightly yellow. But when I placed my hand on the edge of the desk, I felt something. A new responsibility, a new beginning, and a doorway I knew would change everything. I walked to the window and looked out at the massive trucking yard. Hundreds of trucks lined up like a sleeping giant herd. I knew that with the right signal, they could move at once and unleash a force no company would dare underestimate. I drew in a deep breath. This was only the first step, and the road ahead would be anything but peaceful. I had been in charge of North Axis for barely 4 days when a strange call appeared on my phone. No name, just a string of digits from Chicago. I almost ignored it because I was in the middle of a meeting with the operations team about adjusting the maintenance schedule for our trucks. But when the phone vibrated for the third time, something felt off. I excused myself and stepped into the hallway to answer. A woman's voice came through, low, steady, and so controlled it stopped me in my tracks. "I'm Laura Hale. We need to talk." It took me a few seconds to remember how to breathe. That name hit my memory like a punch. Laura Hale had once been the face of Barton and Hale, not only because she was the former wife of Chairman Barton, but because she oversaw all external relations and strategic planning. In the business world, she was considered the soul of the company's golden era. And then, nearly 10 years ago, she disappeared. No explanation, no press conference, just a vague line in the quarterly report about senior leadership transitions. Back then, there were rumors about an internal coup. I never knew the truth, but every time I saw her in the high-level boardroom, her eyes carried something hard to define: vigilance, hurt, and a bitterness packed too tightly to spill. I asked what she wanted. She didn't answer immediately. She only told me I needed to come to Chicago as soon as possible. There was something I needed to know. Maybe I should have questioned that invitation, but her timing made me feel like something was moving behind the scenes, something I hadn't yet seen. After a brief moment of thought, I booked a ticket and flew to Chicago the next morning. Laura chose a restaurant on the 42nd floor of a luxury hotel downtown. When I walked in, she was already seated near the window, her gray hair tied back neatly, her dark coat making her look like someone pulled straight from a political thriller. She didn't stand when I approached. She just looked at me with those unreadable eyes. "Thank you for coming. I know we never truly spoke, but there are things I believe only I can show you." When the server left, she placed a large cream envelope on the table. I opened it. Inside were bank statements from various corporate accounts, share transfer agreements, service contracts, and printed email threads. All of them were tied to one unfamiliar name: Harrison and Co. Freight Solutions. I looked closely. It was a shell company. No real activity, no office, no staff, just a name on paper, created to conduct transactions no one wanted traced. And the person controlling it was Travis Hale. A cold current ran down my spine. I knew Travis was arrogant, impulsive, and even authoritarian at times. But I had never thought he was clever enough to design something like this. And then it hit me. Maybe he hadn't. Maybe someone was guiding him, or benefiting alongside him. Laura watched me as if she could hear my thoughts forming. "Don't underestimate him. Travis lacks competence, but he doesn't lack ambition. The boy has always wanted to prove he deserves to replace his father. And an ambitious fool, Olivia, is the most dangerous kind of person there is." I asked why she was giving me this. Why did she care what her son was doing? Her gaze faltered for a heartbeat. In that brief silence, I saw a piece of the woman she tried so hard to bury. "I once lost everything in that company, not because I failed, but because I trusted the wrong people. Barton, the board, the entire system I helped build. They all turned their backs on me because they wanted someone easier to control. I lost my job, my power, even my family. And now Travis is repeating the same path, but worse. I won't let him destroy what I once built. Not again. Her voice didn't tremble, but I heard the fracture beneath it. She leaned forward. You need to understand. I'm not doing this out of spite. I'm doing it because I know Travis will drag Barton and Hale into the ground if no one stops him, and you are the only person standing in the right place to do it. I asked what she wanted from me. Laura didn't hesitate. Partnership. I provide the information you can't access. You use it to take Travis down. You have the skill. I have the network. We both want this to end. I stayed silent. I knew I needed information, but I also knew Laura Hale was not someone easily read. Partnering with her felt like gripping a sharp blade. Hold it wrong, and I'd slice myself open. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed. A message from Evan, short. Travis is asking about North Axis. He's tracking your moves. Be careful. I closed the phone. The game had already started, and I didn't have many options left. If Travis had begun to suspect me, it meant he was speeding up. And if I stood alone, I would be at a disadvantage. I met Laura's gaze. I knew she was playing her own game, but turning her down would only make me easier prey for someone else. I agreed. When I left the restaurant, the Chicago wind was so fierce I had to hold my coat shut. The city glowed beneath me, but inside I felt only one thing. Everything was shifting. Secrets were being dragged into the light, and Travis would soon realize he wasn't the only one watching. He had already started to sense something was pushing back. I returned to Kansas City with a feeling of unease clinging to me like a shadow. My meeting with Laura had made one thing painfully clear. Travis wasn't just an arrogant disruptor in a conference room. He was standing at the center of a much larger network, and Laura had only lifted one corner of the curtain. I hadn't even settled into my new role at North Axis when the first sign of retaliation appeared. That morning, the head of operations handed me a 2-week freight summary. The volume from Barton and Hale had dropped sharply, and deliberately. I recognized it instantly. No one alters freight flow data without a reason, especially when the operational model was one I built myself. It meant Travis had discovered my involvement with North Axis. By the afternoon, Evan sent me a short message. Internal chatter. He's telling people you sabotaged the quarterly report before you were fired. I wasn't surprised. Travis loved using rumors as weapons. Plant enough doubt, and he could make people believe I left the company in disgrace. And once my reputation sank, anything I did at North Axis could be framed as petty revenge. But he wasn't done. The next day, Barton and Hale's IT department suddenly pulled 6 months of my access logs. They tried to find anything. Files copied, data exported, something they could spin into a violation. But I had always worked clean. I knew how to protect myself better than anyone. When it found nothing, Travis shifted tactics. That evening, North Axis received notice that several federal freight licenses were under review and temporarily suspended. No specifics, just a vague line about compliance risk. Which report, from whom? No one said, but I knew. Travis had leaned on Senator Reardon. In this industry, one well-placed call can bury paperwork for months. I called an emergency meeting with the department heads. They were worried. I tried to keep my voice steady. But deep down, I knew Travis was squeezing North Axis at its weakest points, and he had struck the exact spots I feared most. The next blow didn't come from regulators, but from a customer. Winters & Co., one of North Axis's biggest partners, sent an email saying they heard we were facing legal issues and wanted to temporarily reassess the collaboration. I knew immediately where it came from. One subtle suggestion from Travis, and they stepped back to avoid risk. When the manager read the email aloud, he spoke softly, as if a quiet tone would make the damage smaller. If Winters and Coney pull out, we lose 14% of revenue in 2 days. And like a cruel prophecy, 2 days late, or the revenue report dropped by the exact number. It was the first moment since starting this battle that I truly felt North Axis being dragged toward collapse. I had saved impossible situations over 15 years at Barton and Hale, but this wasn't a technical problem or a process failure. This was a power war, and in that war, every attack from Travis was designed to push me into complete defense. Friday morning, just as I stepped into the office, 3 federal inspectors appeared. No notice, no appointment. They demanded to review all freight documentation from the past 3 months and insisted on visiting the South Warehouse the same day. North Axis had a tangled mess of documentation long before I arrived. Inconsistent storage, sloppy record keeping, and constant disagreements between finance and transportation created endless gaps. This was exactly what Travis wanted to expose. One small violation could freeze North Axis operations for months. I spent the entire day with the team sorting, clarifying, and explaining every sheet of paper. By the time the inspectors left late in the afternoon, I felt like I'd walked out of a battlefield without knowing whether I'd won or lost. They said nothing. They just took notes and left in silence, which frightened me more. I was gathering documents to head out when I received another message from Evan. He's about to present a plan to acquire North Axis. He wants board approval to intervene in the strategic supplier list. I closed my eyes. If he brought that plan to the board and they approved it, Travis could formally block North Axis from Barton and Hale's distribution system. And once that happened, we would lose more than half our contracts within weeks. I knew this better than anyone. I had once built supplier acquisition strategies for Barton and Hale. I knew the exact playbook. Travis didn't need to beat me. He just had to starve North Axis. I stood up, pulled on my coat, and looked out at the dim truck yard. Hundreds of trucks sat silent like a dormant army waiting for orders. We were cornered. And if I didn't strike soon, I wouldn't have a chance at all. I had endured everything I could. And now I understood there was only one way to survive. I had to strike back. Not with rumors or influence, but with real evidence, real data, the kind Travis couldn't twist or outrun. The game had shifted, and I no longer had time to be afraid. I got home close to midnight, but my mind was still running like a machine with no brakes. Travis had pushed North Axis to the edge of the cliff. If I waited even one more day, everything I scraped together, borrowed, and risked to buy this company would be blown away like dust in the wind. I had no choice but to strike back immediately. The next morning, I called an emergency meeting with the entire North Axis management team. I didn't sugarcoat anything. We're launching an independent audit. They stared at me, startled. They knew North Axis had plenty of flaws, and an independent audit could unearth problems they had swept under the rug for years. But I needed it. Without transparency, there was no path to survival. I hired one of the biggest auditing firms in the region, the same group I had worked with indirectly during Barton and Hale's major deals. I told them one thing: if there's an error, show it. If there's a gap, highlight it. I wanted every inch of North Axis under the brightest spotlight possible. A typical CEO would run from that. I didn't. I needed to eliminate every weakness before Travis turned them into weapons. As soon as the audit team began their work, I moved to the next step. I contacted 3 freight partners I had worked with on national projects, people who wouldn't turn their backs because of a rumor. I laid the situation out plainly and backed it with data. North Axis could operate reliably, and the licensing delays were nothing more than interference from Barton and Hale. Some stayed silent for a long moment. Some said they'd consider it. But I knew something about this industry. Reputation wasn't only in the numbers, it was in the way you stood firm during a crisis. By the end of the week, all 3 partners signed contracts: one long-term distribution deal, one seasonal specialized freight agreement, and one expanded warehouse contract. Each contract felt like a brick laid back into North Axis's foundation. But new contracts weren't enough. I needed to rebuild the rotted system from the ground up. I ordered the technology department to upgrade the entire transport management platform, from GPS tracking to real-time fuel cost estimates. Old patched-together software from the past decade was ripped out. I revamped the logistics workflow, set new documentation standards, new maintenance protocols, and stricter data recording. North Axis could not continue surviving as a sluggish relic of its past. 3 weeks later, the internal financial report showed we had officially broken the year-long loss streak. The margin wasn't large, but it was enough to prove North Axis was alive and recovering. I knew Travis wouldn't sit still, and I wasn't about to let him twist the narrative to his advantage. That day, I sat in front of my computer and wrote a public letter addressed to the entire transport and logistics sector, the parts of the industry where information spread faster than any newspaper. In the letter, I made it clear: the delays in federal licensing did not originate from North Axis. Internal audit processes showed full compliance. The disruption came from irregular administrative intervention, with signs pointing back to Barton and Hale. I never attacked anyone by name. I let the data speak. And when I hit send, I knew I had lit a fuse. Not large enough to burn everything down, but bright enough to illuminate the truth. It took only 2 days for the letter to spread across major industry forums. Fleet owners, freight managers, legal advisors, everyone was talking. Some defended the North Axis, some questioned Barton and Hale. In logistics, where a single decision can cost millions, rumors were explosive. Travis would see it as a direct strike, and he didn't keep me waiting. Evan sent me an encrypted email. Inside was a copied draft of a financial report that Travis was forcing Barton and Hale's CFO to rewrite. They were trying to pin last quarter's delayed shipments on North Axis, even though the actual data showed the issue came from Barton and Hale's own storage facilities. Travis couldn't beat me with real data, so he fabricated it. That was the clearest sign yet. He was getting desperate. And desperate men make mistakes. That night, Laura called. Her voice wasn't sharp the way it usually was. It was lower, heavier, as if she knew something was about to break. Look at the messages I'm sending. You're going to need them. A few minutes later, my phone vibrated nonstop. Dozens of screenshots, emails, internal documents, secret meeting schedules, all tied to an offshore transaction between Travis and the CFO. They had been funneling money from Barton and Hale's slush fund to prepare for the North Axis acquisition through the shell company. I sat quietly for a long moment. Not because I was shocked, but because of how detailed the documents were. Laura didn't just know. She had been tracking every move Travis made. I asked how she got all of it. She gave me only one sentence. I know that company better than anyone, and I know exactly what people will do just by seeing where they stand in a boardroom. As much as I didn't want to admit it, she was right. Laura understood Barton and Hale's power structure like the back of her hand, and she knew how to exploit every crack in it. I spent the entire night organizing the documents she sent. I sorted everything into sections: transfers, internal emails, altered reports, acquisition plans, and the exchanges between Travis and the CFO. Together, they formed a full, unbroken chain of events that, if presented correctly, could flip the entire narrative. By the time I finished, the sky was turning pale. I closed the completed file and set it on my desk. This wasn't defense anymore. This was a strike. A legal dossier sharp enough to cut through any boardroom or courtroom. And if Travis thought he had cornered me, he was about to learn the truth. Once I decide to strike back, I have never lost. I spent the entire next morning in the North Axis conference room, standing in front of a whiteboard filled with timelines, arrows, and stacks of documents. What Laura had sent me, combined with the independent audit, formed a complete picture. When I connected each point, Travis's plan appeared like a long crack running straight through the foundation of Barton and Hale. The shell company, the offshore transfers, the political pressure, and every step he had taken to tear down North Axis. Looking at the whole timeline, I realized something unmistakable. Travis had no real strategy. He only had ambition, dragged forward by reckless impulse. And that blind confidence left far too many traces behind. I was reviewing one last set of notes when I received a call from the North Axis attorney. Travis had just filed a lawsuit against me in federal court, accusing me of market disruption and unfair competition. Oh, he wanted to paint me as the saboteur to legitimize his acquisition plan. I recognized it immediately. Not a calculated strike, but noise. When he felt control slipping, he created chaos to bury everything else. The phone vibrated again. This time it was Laura. Travis is about to convince the board to activate the non-compete clause. If they approve it, you'll be blocked from the transport industry for 3 years. I knew that clause well. It was created to protect proprietary tech, but Travis could twist it to paint me as a threat. If the board approved it, North Axis would lose half its contracts in a month. It would be a death sentence. I stared at the timeline on the board. This wasn't a fight between me and Travis anymore. This was the moment that determined who would be left standing. I called Evan. He answered almost immediately. "What are you going to do?" he asked. I answered plainly, "I'm meeting the board. No more defense. I'm putting everything on the table." Evan was silent for a few seconds, then said he'd arrange the most discreet way in. We both understood meetings like this never appeared on anyone's official schedule. That afternoon, I flew to Minneapolis. Evan met me at the back entrance of the building. We walked through a hallway only longtime staff knew existed, past the tech room, then up a service staircase that led directly to the board floor. I wasn't trembling. I wasn't angry. I was focused. I had spent my entire career preparing for this moment without ever realizing it. When I stepped inside, every pair of eyes turned to me, some surprised, some unreadable. Travis's father sat at the head of the table, hands clasped. Travis was there too, leaning against the table, his face draining of color when he saw me. "You're not allowed in here," he snapped. I set the file down on the table. "Since you sued me, I have the right to present counter evidence. The board should hear the truth." No one objected. Mr. Barton simply nodded, signaling me to continue. I didn't start with emotion. I started with data. I laid out the emails between Travis and the CFO, highlighting each line where they discussed altering reports. I presented the offshore transfer documents with bank verification stamps. Then I explained the structure of the shell company Harrison & Co., how it was created, how it functioned, and how it was being used to stage the North Axis takeover. Next, I turned to the independent audit. Every violation Travis accused North Axis of didn't exist. Every delay he blamed on us traced back to Barton and Hale's warehouses or Travis's own department. No one moved. I could feel the air tighten as I continued. Travis's endgame was simple. Use the shell company to acquire North Axis with offshore funds and internal slush money. Once he controlled North Axis, he'd inflate its value and sell the shares to a foreign investment fund. The profit would go into his pocket while Barton and Hale absorbed the legal risk. At that point, Travis jumped to his feet. "This is all fake. You're making this up." I slid a notarized bank document toward him. "If it's fake, why did your CFO sign it?" Silence flooded the room. Travis looked around, searching for someone to defend him. But Mr. Barton stayed completely still. When he removed his glasses, I knew what was coming. "Travis, do you have anything to say?" His voice wasn't angry. It was cold enough to freeze the air. Travis stepped back half a pace, mumbling fragments that never formed words. I had never seen him like this. All the arrogance, the swagger, the way he treated everyone like tools, gone. He wasn't the man who had pushed me out of the company. He was just someone standing at the edge of a collapse he built with his own hands. Mr. Barton looked at Evan. Evan nodded, stepped outside, and returned a moment later with 2 security officers. Travis went pale. He turned to me, as if wanting to say something, but no words came out. He just stood there, panic widening in his eyes. No one spoke. No one defended him. No one reached out to pull him back from the cliff he had carved for himself. And as they escorted him out of the room, I realized this moment wasn't just my victory. It was the first time in years that truth finally outweighed power. I left the boardroom when the sky was already dark. The long, quiet hallway of Barton and Hale glowed under soft yellow lights. But there was no sense of victory in me. I knew the meeting hadn't ended there. The board would continue behind closed doors through the night, and Travis's future would be decided in a room I no longer belonged to. About an hour later, while I was sitting in a small cafe near the headquarters waiting for updates from Evan, my phone buzzed. A message from him. They're meeting. Tension is high. No one's taking his side. I read it twice. What I felt wasn't satisfaction, but a heaviness I couldn't name. I knew Travis had pushed everything too far. I knew he had dug the hole he fell into. But I didn't expect him to collapse this fast, like a building losing its foundation in one pull. 30 minutes later, another message came. "It's done. They removed him." I set my phone down. A part of me waited for the relief to arrive, but it didn't. Instead, silence spread through me like water filling an empty room. After the closed-door meeting, they revoked all of Travis's executive access. Every login credential, every badge, every approval clearance was locked within minutes. Evan said he didn't fight it. He just stood there, like a man realizing he no longer had a place on the ship he believed he commanded. Travis was forced to sign a resignation that same night. The document was already prepared. All he had to do was write his name. I could picture it clearly, A dim room, attorneys on one side, two board members on the other, and Travis in the middle, his hand trembling as he signed the paper he once thought would mark his rise to the top. The next day, the media released the statement. The headline had that perfectly polished corporate tone. Travis Hale departs Barton and Hale to pursue new opportunities. I let out a quiet laugh. That wasn't news. It was silk draped over an explosion. No one leaves a corporation after midnight to pursue anything. But the public would never know the truth. Large companies can flatten any scandal with a single sanitized sentence. Later that afternoon, the legal team sent me the agreement withdrawing the lawsuit. Barton and Hale agreed to drop all accusations and publicly stated they no longer considered North Axis a risk. They wanted everything wrapped up neatly and quickly. The faster Travis disappeared from the narrative, the safer they felt. I signed the agreement with one decisive stroke of the pen. Just as I finished, my phone buzzed again. Evan. He's not coming back. The board will never give him another chance. I stared at the message without any sense of triumph. What unsettled me wasn't Travis's removal, it was the silence after. A void, as if someone had pulled a major piece off the board, but the game continued anyway. I could see Laura's hand in all of this, even though she never stepped into that meeting room. The documents she provided, the timing of her messages, the precision of her information, everything was too aligned, too perfectly placed. I knew she wanted Travis out. I knew she had her reasons. But Laura never acted only out of revenge. She always had a long-term objective, and that was what worried me. That afternoon, I sat in my North Axis office as the late sun cut across my desk, turning the glass surface gold. I opened my laptop and reviewed the files Laura had sent. Every email thread, transfer note, and offshore map pointed directly at Travis. But the longer I looked, the more I realized something that mattered far more. Travis wasn't the beginning. He was the final piece in a battle that had been going on for years. A war between Laura and Barton, between the old guard and the new regime, between builders and opportunists. Travis was just a late arrival, ambitious, inexperienced, swept up in strategies he never understood. I closed the laptop. The truth was so simple it chilled me. I hadn't defeated Travis. I had only accelerated the end Laura had prepared long before I stepped into the game. In her design, he was always the sacrificial pawn. I wondered what she felt hearing that her own son had been stripped of power in the same room she once controlled. A part of me believed it hurt her. Another part believed she saw it as the price required for a larger purpose. That evening, as I left the North Axis building, I called Laura. The call went straight to voicemail. I tried again, same result. She had vanished the moment Travis fell, and that made my unease sharpen into something colder. Sitting in my car, phone still in my hand, I looked out at the vast dark lot. I could feel it. Laura was already one step ahead again, moving towards something I couldn't yet see. Her silence wasn't a retreat. It was preparation for the next move, and as that realization sank in, a chill ran down my spine. Because I understood that even though Travis was gone, the power struggle surrounding Barton and Hale was far from over. It had only changed shape. I didn't know what Laura was planning or where she would appear next. But I knew one thing for certain. Someone like her never disappears without leaving a tremor behind. And North Axis, and I, were still standing in the center of a storm whose full outline I had yet to see. The voicemail came early the next morning, right as I stepped into my North Axis office. The alert echoed through the empty room, sharp enough to make me stop mid-stride. When I opened the inbox, the sender's name appeared, Laura Hale. I froze, rooted to the floor. I pressed play. Her voice came through, softer, lower, and more exhausted than I had ever heard it. Olivia, the game is over. Just one sentence, but enough to tell me something was wrong. She didn't sound like someone who had finally achieved her goal. She sounded like someone who had just set down a burden heavy enough to crack a lifetime open. After a few seconds of silence, she continued, I didn't want Travis to drown. As foolish as he's still my son, but I couldn't let him destroy the company again. I watched it being taken from me once. I wasn't going to watch it happen a second time. I could hear the fracture in every word. This wasn't the voice of a cold strategist. It was the voice of a mother who had pushed her own child down a path he would never come back from. I didn't know what to feel. Anger, sympathy, confusion. I wasn't sure where I stood inside the storm of emotions she had left behind. The message ended with a whisper: "Finish what you started. I trust you know what to do." And then, nothing. No goodbye, no apology, no explanation, just the cold silence after. I called her back instantly. The line didn't connect. I texted her. No read receipt. I tried again twice, but the same automated voice answered each time. The number was no longer in service. By noon, I called Evan. He checked Barton and Hale's internal systems. Laura had locked every account, wiped her email history, and frozen or transferred every asset she still held. Her office on the 28th floor was empty, no files, no personal items, as if she had never existed. I drove to the place she once chose for our first private meeting, a small bar along the Riverside Road, the one she liked because fewer eyes paid attention there. The sky was gray, and Kansas City felt strangely hollow. When I stepped inside, the dim yellow lights glowed across the bar counter. The bartender recognized me, nodded, and pointed toward a seat at the far end. A cream-colored envelope rested on the wooden surface. No address, no stamp. Just my name, written in blue ink I recognized instantly. Olivia. I sat down, hands trembling slightly as I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, but the moment I read the first line, something shifted in the air around me. Transfer of 11% ownership of North Axis, signed and notarized, perfectly valid, crisp, and undeniable. Within seconds, I realized what it meant. I now hold 65% of North Axis, full control. I leaned back in the chair and stared up at the dark wood ceiling. A part of me wanted to smile. Another part felt an icy shiver run along my spine. I had fought to save North Axis, to pull it back from the brink, but I never imagined Laura would disappear and leave me with power like this. I read the document again, slowly, carefully. It wasn't just a transaction. It was the end of an era. The era Laura Hale once ruled, then lost, and finally handed off to someone of her choosing. Not out of affection, not out of gratitude, out of strategy. I understood that better than anyone. Laura hadn't helped me. She had used me. I was the piece she chose to finish the plan she had been carrying for a decade after she was forced out of Barton and Hale. I was the only one with enough industry knowledge, enough resilience, enough data, and enough motive to take the fight to its final breath. She didn't give me strength. She simply placed me where that strength could no longer be ignored. I stared at the page a little longer. The wind outside shook the door. The bar was empty, except for the bartender wiping glasses in the corner. Everything was so still I could hear my own heartbeat. I wondered, if Laura hadn't vanished, would I have thanked her? Or asked why she pulled me into her war? Why did she choose me instead of anyone else? I had no answers. On the drive home, the night settled over the city, streetlights reflecting across the wet pavement. I drove slowly, feeling the weight of a secret only I knew how to carry. I thought of Travis, the desperation in his eyes before security let him out. I thought of Laura, a woman who sacrificed even blood ties to rebuild the empire she once believed belonged to her. And then I thought of myself, 65%, a powerful number, a powerful position. But I didn't feel like a victor. I felt like the last piece still standing on a board where every other piece had been removed. When I got home, I sat on the sofa, placed the envelope on the table, and stared at it until Laura's signature blurred in my vision. I couldn't sleep. I lay there listening to cars on the road, the steady ticking of the clock. I tried convincing myself I had won, that I had reclaimed the power they once took from me, that I had survived everything Travis threw at me. But deep inside, one question echoed like a voice rising from the bottom of a well. Was I the victor, or just the chosen piece? I spent most of the following week in my glass-walled office overlooking Kansas City, with Laura's share transfer tucked neatly inside my desk drawer. Every time I opened it, I found myself asking the same question. What would I do with the power she had handed me, or rather, forced me to hold? The answer came on a very quiet morning when I walked into North Axis's central warehouse. Workers stood in line picking up their schedules. Some whispered. Some watched me with cautious eyes. I recognized that look. I had carried it for 15 years at Barton and Hale. The look of someone who works hard, yet always stands outside the circle of power, replaceable at the flick of someone else's hand. I wasn't going to let this place repeat the cycle I had lived through. North Axis would not become Barton and Hale version 2. I gathered the entire senior management team into the largest conference room and laid out my restructuring plan. Not the kind of restructuring big corporations loved. No cuts, no reshuffling for the sake of optics. I started with a simple principle: transparency, responsibility, and humanity. I required every department to open its internal operational data to the whole company. Anyone could view it. Anyone could give feedback. No more one person's numbers mattering more than another's. No more hidden corners where power could hide. I created a leadership training program for younger managers, something I had wished existed when I first started. I launched a family support fund for longtime employees. We opened an anonymous reporting line, and I promised every submission would go directly to me. Within weeks, the company felt different. I heard laughter in the hallways, something I hadn't heard much of since my first day here. People began believing in the place they worked, believing their effort mattered, believing they weren't the Olivias of 15 years ago, the ones who could be called useless in front of an entire room. 3 months later, something happened that I thought would take at least a year. North Axis was ranked the most trusted logistics provider in the country by the American Transport Federation. New contracts poured in. Routes ran more efficiently than ever. Loss and damage rates dropped to the lowest number in the company's history. Employees were proud. Managers stood taller. And I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: a quiet kind of relief. Not long after, I received a proposal from Barton and Hale. They wanted to reestablish a strategic partnership. Polished language, elegant phrasing, clearly crafted by their PR department. They wanted North Axis back as a primary partner, wanted joint meetings, and even wanted to explore shared operational data. I read the invitation a few times. Then I wrote a very simple reply: "Thank you for reaching out. North Axis is currently pursuing an independent long-term strategy. Wishing your company continued success." I hit send. Not angry, not triumphant, just the calm decision of someone who had already stepped into a new era. That afternoon, Evan texted me: "I've been appointed COO. It won't be easy, but I'm going to try to do the right things. Congratulations, Olivia. You deserve everything you've built." I smiled. Evan had always been steady and honest, and this industry needed more people like him in positions of power. Barton and Hale would be better with him on their executive team, even if that company no longer had anything to do with me. A month later, I stood on the main stage of the American Logistics Conference in front of thousands from across the country. The lights were bright enough to make me blink, but my hands didn't shake. I spoke about transparency, about leadership culture, about how a company could rise from crisis when it was led by integrity instead of fear. When the applause rolled through the hall, I wondered what Laura would think if she saw me up there. She was gone, but her influence lingered around me like a shadow, part guidance, part test. That night, back in my office, as I opened my laptop to review a few reports before heading home, a new email appeared in my inbox. No sender, no subject, just one single line: "Congratulations. The real game is only beginning." I read it 3 times. No attachment, no identifier, nothing but that one sentence. Polite in a strange way, but heavy with implication. Laura? Or someone else? A new opponent? A warning? A blessing? I didn't know. But for the first time since all of this began, I wasn't afraid. I leaned back in my chair and looked out through the glass, where the city lights shifted like a slow-moving river. I thought about everything I had walked through: the humiliation, the dismissal, the fight, the rise. I was no longer the woman called dead weight, no longer the target pushed out of the boardroom, no longer the lone figure standing against a corporate empire. I was the builder, and this time, the rules would be mine. I shut off the screen, stood up, and walked out of the office with a soft, honest smile. Because whatever that email meant, I was ready, truly ready.